Samantha Josephson in a remote location in South Carolina after she was brutally murdered. Let's bring in our panel here. Former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani joining me with Sarah Becker, criminal defense attorney. Neama, this witness on the surface would seem to be just foundational, right? Someone who found the victim's body. But he said something very telling, that the location is not somewhere you would just wind up. Apparently it was so remote that he, is a turkey hunter, didn't expect to find anyone out there, let alone a body.
Well, Derek, that's normally where bodies are dumped, in these remote locations. Fortunately for the prosecution, there's plenty of blood evidence in the back of Roland's vehicle and plenty of blood evidence in the trunk of his vehicle, as well as Sammy's cell phone in the vehicle. So they have more than enough evidence to tie him to the murder and the scene of the crime. And again, I agree with you, Derek. This is just a foundational witness, though. I'd love to hear about the turkey hunting out there in South Carolina.
Right, sounds interesting for sure. Was a victim who was brought to this location, dumped. She wasn't just winding up there. He said this is not someplace you just wind up, you just show up. Someone had to bring that body there, bring Samantha Josephson to that location. And you know, Neama, you talked about the forensic evidence, the various pieces of forensic evidence found in the suspect's vehicle, a lot of blood evidence, as well as the victim's cell phone in the car. But the defense claims that the car was taken by someone else, that the defendant wasn't anywhere near the victim here, that he was essentially being framed. You buy that defense?
You know, I don't, but I've been thinking about this case a lot, and it's very rare for a criminal defendant to be found at the scene of the murder crime. So, I mean, he was driving the vehicle, that black Chevy Impala, when he was arrested. He tried to flee on foot when law enforcement rolled up on him. And there's pictures of him on social media in front of that Chevy. So it's clearly his vehicle. And I've been thinking, what's the only possible defense here? You know, especially when, you know, there's someone that looks like him on camera trying to use the victim's ATM card. And really it has to be what Roland's father has said to the press. And that is that he was at a party, you know, he passed out and someone took his car, committed this, you know, heinous act and returned the vehicle. Not really a good defense, but I think it's the only defense that you can present in a case like this, something to that effect. I don't think the jury's going to buy it, but I think that's all they can hang their hat on here.
So Neama Rahmani, in terms of the remote area, this would suggest that this area is so remote, whoever is responsible for this murder, whoever put the victim's body there, had to have known, or at least be familiar with the area.
Well, sure, we wouldn't expect Nate Roland to dump the body at a bar near the 5 Points where, you know, Sammy Josephson was picked up. So it's not surprising. And again, I think these are just foundational witnesses. You could tell a lot from how the prosecution is presenting their witnesses in what order. We started with Sammy's boyfriend, then her roommate. They're really going chronologically here, and it's only going to get worse for the defense. I mean, there's so much overwhelming evidence here. And the fact that the defense has spent so little time cross-examining these witnesses, the majority of witnesses haven't been cross-examined at all, and the ones that have been subject to cross-examination have been very short. And I know the defense theory of the case because they put it out in opening that this was a sloppy investigation, they jumped to conclusions and all that type of thing. So I would have expected some more robust cross-examination of these witnesses because it's only going to get worse for Nate Roland and his defense team.
A natural resources officer who saw the victim's body in that remote location. Neama, you mentioned, though, that you wouldn't expect this body to be dumped in an area very public, right? It would have to be in a remote location just because of the nature of the crime and the victim's injuries.
Of course. I mean, only a foolish person would dump a body in broad daylight in a busy city. So certainly not unexpected. And one of the great things about covering these trials on law and crime, and you see how these different states operate. We talked about turkey hunting, but one thing I've learned in South Carolina, when you address the court, you beg the court's indulgence. So haven't heard that before. I guess it's something that's unique to South Carolina. But again, I've seen it and heard it over and over again. One really important point I'd like to make about Nate Roland and this cross-examination is this. Let's not forget, on Monday, he tried to fire his defense team, the public defender's office, saying that they weren't fighting for him. So, some of this is legal strategy and addressing the merits of the case, but I mean, you got to be thinking if you're the criminal defendant here and you're on trial for murder, you already have doubts about your team, and what have they really done these past 2 days of trial? They haven't really done a whole lot, unfortunately. So there may be some attorney and client control issues going on here.
To Sarah's point, it's a given that an investigator would show up at the scene and having to take pictures and do the measurements and all of that. But was surprising to one of the other witnesses we saw is the fact that a body would be there at all, because it's not a place, this witness said, where a person would just show up, not a place where you'd expect to find a body. So it seems to say that, however,
the state is just moving methodically through these witnesses, just chronologically. But we're getting a lot closer. We're going to get close to the pictures of Sammy Josephson's body. And let's not forget, she was stabbed more than 30 times. So much so, her mother was unable to even ID her at the morgue. And this is all evidence that came out during the really sad bail hearing in this case. So we're getting closer. We're probably one or two witnesses away. But again, the state's just kind of moving methodically through the witnesses chronologically. So we're getting closer to the real evidence in this case. I expect to hear it today and tomorrow.
And we've been moving fast. This trial has. We've gone through a number of witnesses already. But the car will be really critical, right, in terms of tying the victim and the suspect together at one point before the murder.
Derek, now it's getting interesting, and you're right. We're getting to the car, and the same investigator, Lieutenant Shank, who investigated the body, also investigated the vehicle. So now we're going to start to hear all the blood evidence. We've already touched upon the cell phone, and now it's going to start moving very quickly for the prosecution, because it was a bloodbath, and we're talking about a lot of blood in that vehicle. So we're going to hear about that. We're going to hear about how Nate Rowland was driving the vehicle when he was arrested, and it's all going to point the finger at one person and one person only, the defendant in this case.
Right, and it seems there was some sort of struggle in the vehicle of the defendant. How does that impact a jury, seeing those pictures and then hearing the testimony of the crime scene investigator?
Derek, it has a huge impact, and this is where Nate Rowland gets convicted with this witness. You're hearing the horrifying testimony about the crime scene, the fingerprints, the footprints. Her fingernails were cut off. She was brutally murdered, and this is just the beginning. We talked about the cell phone. The cell phone is going to track all the way to both the cell phones. Nate Rowland is going to track all the way to his family home, which we're going to hear is 2 miles from where the body was dumped. So this is just going to be an avalanche of evidence that is going to overwhelm the defense in this case. And we're going to hear more about the cell phone and the blood, and it's just going to be too much for the defense team to counter in this case.
Yeah, you talk about the cell phone. We know that it's actually 2 cell phones that the investigators will be talking about. First, it's the suspect's or the defendant's cell phone, which was pinged to some of the same locations as the victim here, pinged in terms of being in a remote location where the body was found, pinged in terms of being in the vehicle as well. So that's a pretty damning evidence, right, Neama?
No question. I mean, this cell phone evidence is going to bury Nate Rowland. His story of how he was at a party and he drank too much and passed out, someone took his car. Well, someone had to take his cell phone. And let's talk about those cell phones. At a certain point, Sammy's cell phone was powered down, and apparently we're going to see video evidence of Nate Rowland trying to sell Sammy Josephson's cell phone, in addition to him at the ATM, trying to use her ATM card on multiple occasions. So it's going to be very, very difficult, and this is going to be the beginning of the end for the defense here.